She thought it was just another day job, something temporary quiet under the radar. A way to pay rent, keep herself busy, and maybe stop feeling like her life was stalling. Clara Bennett wasn't looking for meaning when she signed the non-disclosure agreement and walked through the heavy oak doors of the Grayson estate. She certainly wasn't expecting to find a man collapsed on the bathroom floor, naked, vulnerable, and looking at her like she had just shattered the last piece of dignity he'd been holding on to. The housekeeper had told her not to go near the West Wing, just clean the rooms assigned. No questions, no conversation, no crossing boundaries. Those were the rules. And Clara, fresh off a string of disappointments and determined not to lose another job, had every intention of following them. But rules have a funny way of crumbling in the face of a human cry for help. It was nearly 7 in the evening. The California sky outside was painted in fading gold, and the ocean's quiet breath could be heard through the open balcony doors. Clara was finishing up in the guest bathroom when she heard it. A crash, followed by a low, pained grunt, then silence. She froze, cleaning rag in hand, heart suddenly racing. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe something fell off a shelf. Maybe a nurse or someone else was nearby. But the silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was void, still, wrong. Clara hesitated. Her shoes were damp from mopping. She looked toward the corridor that led to the forbidden wing. The hallway lights flickered faintly above, and she remembered the housekeeper's words again. Do not engage, do not intrude, do not enter the West Wing. But what if someone was hurt? She moved, slowly at first, then faster, almost on instinct. She followed the echo of the earlier sound down a quiet marble hallway, her footsteps muffled by the thick rugs. The door to the master bathroom was ajar, just enough to reveal steam curling into the hall. She knocked gently. "Hello, is everything okay?" No response. She pushed the door open a little more. That's when she saw him. A man lying on the cold stone floor, legs twisted at an unnatural angle, one arm sprawled against the tiles. The other was gripping the edge of a bench, as if he'd tried and failed to pull himself up. Water from the walk-in shower was still running, forming a shallow pool around him. He was shirtless, his skin pale and wet, a scar running across his rib cage. A towel was barely covering him, clinging more to the idea of modesty than achieving it. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead, and his breathing was labored. Clara didn't move, neither did he. For a moment they just stared at each other. I told them I didn't want anyone. His voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper. And now they send you. She stepped forward cautiously. I heard the crash. Are you hurt? He let out a sound between a laugh and a breath of pain. Only my pride. She reached for a towel hanging nearby. I'm not a nurse, I'm just the cleaner. He looked away. Then you shouldn't be here. Clara knelt beside him anyway. I know, but I also know that people aren't meant to be left on cold floors. Let me help you. He didn't answer, but he didn't stop her either. And that was the moment everything began to change. Clara Bennett had not expected her life to twist into the shape it had taken. Just 6 months earlier, she was working full-time at a nursing facility in San Diego, helping patients through the long, slow process of healing, or in some cases simply comforting them through their final days. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. It made her feel useful. Until the day her mother passed and something inside her simply broke. Her mother had battled ALS for years, and Clara had been there through every stage, feeding bathing reading to her when she lost the strength to hold books. After the funeral, Clara left the care facility. She didn't know where to go next, only that she couldn't return. To a place that smelled like antiseptic and sounded like shallow breathing in the middle of the night. A friend referred her to a private domestic placement agency. It paid well-required discretion and promised structure without emotional entanglement. That was exactly what she needed, or so she thought. The Grayson estate was perched like a silent monument along the cliffs of Laguna Beach. Modern, sweeping, and angular in design, it had walls of glass facing the Pacific, and behind those walls a quiet that felt less like peace and more like mourning. Clara remembered her first steps into the foyer-polished marble floors, minimalist decor, everything sharp-edged and expensive. The housekeeper, Mrs. Holloway, greeted her with the kind of smile that didn't touch her eyes and handed her a printed list of rooms to clean, along with a set of instructions that included one rule repeated twice: never enter the West Wing. That part of the house belonged to Mr. Grayson, and Mr. Grayson valued his privacy. She hadn't known much about Ethan Grayson at the time. The name was vaguely familiar, but it wasn't until her second week that she remembered seeing him years ago on a TED Talk speaking with fire and charisma about AI-driven accessibility for the disabled. Back then, he had stood on stage, tall, lean, powerful, magnetic. Now he barely left the western wing of his own house, and according to Holloway, hadn't accepted a visitor in over a year. He was, as she described him, grieving, angry, and very particular. Clara had assumed he wanted space. She understood that. Grief demanded its own room, and so she stayed out of the West Wing, vacuumed the sprawling guest suites, dusted untouched bookshelves, and tried not to wonder about the man behind the door at the end of the long corridor. That changed the night she found him on the bathroom floor. The next morning, Holloway's eyes narrowed when Clara hesitated to answer questions about why she had been in the West Wing. Clara only said he needed help. Holloway didn't press. Instead, she quietly handed Clara a second schedule, one that included evenings. Mr. Grayson had, to everyone's surprise, requested her by name. Clara was stunned. She'd assumed the incident would be the last straw. But now she was being asked to return, this time with a basin of warm water towels and medical-grade soap. When she entered his suite that evening, it felt like stepping into another world. The West Wing was darker, quieter, more personal. Framed photographs of distant places lined the hall. A piano sat silently in one corner, its surface covered in dust. The scent of sandalwood lingered in the air, faint but persistent. Ethan was waiting in the bathroom, already seated in his wheelchair. He didn't look at her at first. He simply said, "There are gloves if you prefer to wear them." Clara knelt beside the tub, tested the water, and shook her head. "I'm fine." The routine was clinical. At first, measured movements, polite instructions, mutual silence. But there was something in the air between them, something neither of them acknowledged. Vulnerability has a way of stripping everything else bare. Over the following days, she noticed things. The way he tensed before she touched his skin. The way he relaxed when she spoke to him about books, the ocean, the weather, anything but the accident. She noticed how he always looked out the window while she worked, as if searching for someone just beyond the horizon. And she noticed how his voice softened just slightly when he said her name. She wasn't falling for him. Not yet. But something had started to shift, and Clara, who had spent so long building walls around herself, felt the first crack appear. The first time Clara saw Ethan smile, it wasn't because of anything she said or did. It happened unexpectedly on a Thursday evening while she was folding towels in the laundry room next to the West Wing. The sound drifted in through the partially open door, just a quiet, fleeting laugh low, and surprised the kind that escapes before someone remembers they aren't supposed to feel joy. She paused, holding a hand towel to her chest, and listened. Nothing came after. No voice, no continuation. Just silence, heavy and uncertain, like the echo of something too precious to risk repeating. She didn't mention it the next time they saw each other. Ethan had a way of watching her closely without seeming to look directly. That night, like all the others that week, she helped him into the adapted bathtub. He gave minimal instructions, now letting her move more freely, though his expression remained guarded. She had learned the rhythm of their evenings, the way he clenched his jaw when the water hit old scars, the way he exhaled slowly when her fingers moved through his hair. She never lingered, never made it feel like pity. Pity was the one thing he couldn't stomach. One night, as she adjusted the grab bar and offered her arm, Ethan surprised her with a question. "Do you think I'm a coward?" She blinked. "No, why would you ask that?" "Because I refuse physical therapy. Because I spend my days hiding in one wing of a house, too big for one man. Because I let other people wash me instead of fighting to do it myself." Clara looked at him, not as an employer, not as a patient, but as a man. "You're not a coward, Ethan. You're grieving. That's not the same thing." He looked away. "People expect me to bounce back. They think because I'm rich, because I have resources, that I should be healing faster." Smiling more, trying harder, she nodded slowly. "People expect a lot of things they have no right to." They sat in the silence for a long time, the only sound the gentle trickle of the water running through the wall-mounted fountain into the bath. That same night when she dried his arms and lifted the towel to his chest, his hand reached up, trembling, hesitant, and touched her wrist. "Thank you," he said simply. It was the first time he'd said it, and for Clara it felt like being handed something fragile and sacred. After that, things began to change, not quickly, not dramatically, but steadily. He started asking about her life. At first, it was small things. How long had she lived in California? Did she like the coast? What kind of books did she read? Then it became deeper. Did you ever wish you'd done something else? Do you believe in second chances? Are you afraid to start over? She answered each question honestly. Yes, she'd wanted to be a writer once. No, she wasn't afraid of starting over, but she was tired. Tired of chasing stability that never lasted. Tired of trying to fix things that were never hers to fix. Tired of feeling like her life existed in the quiet spaces between other people's emergencies. One evening she found him in the music room, sitting in front of the piano. His fingers hovered above the keys, but never touched them. "I used to compose," he said without turning. "It helped me remember what mattered." And now he shook his head. "Now I can't finish anything. Every note feels like it's trying to pull something out of me I'm not ready to give." Clara stepped forward. "Maybe that's the point. Maybe the music is supposed to help you let go." He turned to her, his eyes tired but thoughtful. "And what are you letting go of, Clara?" She swallowed. The sound of my mother's breathing in her final weeks. The smell of antiseptic. The look in her eyes when she realized she couldn't lift a spoon anymore. and the guilt I carry for still being here when she's not. Ethan said nothing for a while. Then very quietly he whispered, "We're both survivors of something." Clara found herself returning to his wing even when she wasn't scheduled. Sometimes she brought tea, sometimes a book, sometimes just silence. They'd sit by the window, watching the waves roll in, letting the presence of each other become a comfort. He let her push his chair down the stone path to the edge of the garden. He started writing again, scribbles in a worn notebook that he never let her see, but never hid either. One evening just after dusk, they sat by the fireplace in his private library. Ethan had taken to spending more time out of his room, his body still resistant, but his eyes more alive. Clara had told him a story about a boy in her neighborhood who believed seagulls were reincarnated sailors. Ethan chuckled, then looked at her for a long time. "You make me forget that my body doesn't work, that I've lost so much, that I'm scared of being seen as weak." She reached across the space between them and rested her hand on his. "You're not weak, Ethan, you're human." For the first time he didn't flinch at her touch. As autumn crept into the air, their routine continued, but something deeper bloomed between them. It lived in the space between bathwater and towels, between silent breakfasts and long looks across the room. Clara knew it wasn't professional. She knew the lines were blurring, but her heart didn't seem to care. Neither did his. One night after she finished helping him out of the bath, Ethan touched her face gently. His hand shook, but his voice was clear. "I don't know what's happening to me. Clara, are we crossing a line?" She looked into his eyes, the blue of them soft under the bathroom lights. "Maybe, but maybe some lines are meant to be crossed." That night, nothing more happened. No kiss, no confession. Just the quiet acknowledgement that something irreversible had begun. Something they couldn't name yet, but something that neither of them wanted to stop. Clara began noticing little things in Ethan's wing that hadn't been there before. A half-finished book on the armrest of his favorite chair. The faint scent of cedar from a candle left burning too long. The piano lid left open as if he'd almost played but couldn't bring himself to touch the keys. Something was shifting, not just in his routine, but in the air between them. He still guarded his emotions, but the fortress he lived behind had started letting in light. One rainy afternoon, as the storm rolled in over the cliffs, Clara was organizing a linen cabinet at the far end of the hallway when she noticed a door slightly ajar. It led to a room she had never seen before. Curiosity tugged at her. She stepped in quietly, her footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The room was dim-filled with soft shadows and a kind of sacred stillness. On the far wall, dozens of photographs were arranged in perfect symmetry. Some were framed in silver, others were simple prints taped to corkboard. All of them featured the same woman. She was beautiful in a timeless way. Warm eyes, easy smile, sun-kissed hair, always windblown or caught mid-motion. She was laughing in nearly every image, often with Ethan beside her, both of them, youthful and glowing. Clara's chest tightened. She recognized her from one framed photograph Ethan kept near his piano. This was his wife, or rather the ghost of her. She stepped closer, noticing a newspaper clipping pinned near the center. It read, "Tragedy strikes tech mogul wife. A visionary CEO dies in plane crash." Her fingers trembled as she reached for it. She didn't need to read the whole article. The headline said enough. When she turned around, Ethan was in the doorway. He looked as though the breath had been knocked out of him. "I didn't mean to." Clara started, but he held up his hand. "It's okay. Most people pretend not to be curious. You just didn't lie about it." She stepped away from the wall, heart pounding. I should have asked. No. It's time someone saw it. His voice was low, heavy, with something deeper than sorrow. That was Julia. We were married for 6 years. She died 2 weeks after our anniversary. Clara stayed silent, letting the weight of the moment rest between them. Ethan moved slowly into the room, wheeling toward the photographs. I was flying the plane, a private 2-seater. We were coming home from a charity event in Guatemala. Something went wrong with the engine. I tried to land, but his voice cracked. I walked away. She didn't. Clara's throat tightened. "I'm so sorry, Ethan." He nodded, once eyes on a picture of Julia, sitting cross-legged on a rooftop, laughing into the wind. "I didn't play piano for over a year. Couldn't touch it. Couldn't even listen to music. Every note reminded me of her. We used to write songs together for fun." She sang like she didn't care if anyone listened. He turned to Clara, eyes filled with shadows. I thought if I shut everything out, I could preserve her memory. Keep her close by not letting anything else in. Clara stepped toward him, her voice soft. "But you let me in." He didn't speak. He didn't have to. His silence said everything. That night, after she helped him into bed, Clara sat in the armchair beside him, holding the same notebook he scribbled in daily. "May I?" He hesitated, then gave a slow nod. The pages were filled with unfinished melodies, poetic fragments, and a recurring phrase that appeared like a heartbeat throughout "Still Here." She closed the notebook gently and placed it on the bedside table. "I think you survived for a reason, Ethan. I think you're meant to write again." He watched her, something tender flickering in his eyes. "And you, why are you here, Clara?" She smiled faintly. "Because I wasn't done helping people, but also because I needed someone to help me remember why I mattered." He reached for her hand. "You've always mattered, more than you know." The line between caregiver and companion dissolved quietly that night. It didn't require a declaration, just the weight of a shared past and the quiet hope of something new. Over the next few weeks, Clara found Ethan sitting at the piano more often. He didn't play yet, but he lingered longer. His fingers danced across keys without pressing them. She began spending time with him outside the nightly routine. They read books, watched old movies, talked about dreams they once had and the people they used to be. Ethan slowly began letting go of his guilt. He told Clara about his parents, his first company, his fear of being seen as an object of pity. Clara shared stories of her mother's resilience of nights. She cried herself to sleep in hospital break rooms, of the loneliness that wrapped around her after the funeral like a second skin. They were both still healing pieces of people slowly reassembling into something whole. One evening, Ethan rolled into the music room where Clara had been organizing sheet music. She turned to greet him, but he stopped her with a look. "Play something," he said. "Me." She laughed. "I can't even read most of these notes. Just touch the keys. Remind them what it feels like." Clara sat at the bench, hesitated, then pressed a few uncertain chords. Ethan closed his eyes. "Thank you." "For what?" "For bringing the music back into this house. For being brave enough to see me when I couldn't even look at myself." Clara's eyes filled with quiet emotion. "You saw me too, Ethan, when I didn't think anyone ever would again." That night, for the first time since Julia's death, Ethan placed his hands on the piano and played a single melody. It was simple, broken, beautiful, just like him, and Clara sat beside him, listening not just with her ears, but with her whole heart, knowing they were no longer just two damaged souls passing time in a quiet house. They were something more now, something fragile forming, something real. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm Clara had come to crave. She would arrive each morning to find Ethan in the garden or at the piano, sometimes writing, sometimes simply watching the waves break against the cliffs. The man who once refused help now greeted her with a softness that hadn't been there before, something raw and unguarded. He began his physical therapy again on his own terms, slow and stubborn but consistent. Clara supported him without pushing. She never once framed his progress as recovery, but rather as a choice he made every day to try. That distinction mattered. Their intimacy deepened without labels. They didn't kiss. They didn't sleep in the same bed. But their hands lingered longer, their glances held more weight, and their silences grew warmer. Love in its truest form was unfolding not through grand gestures, but through quiet consistency. One evening after a long walk along the cliff path, where Ethan used a newly designed motorized support frame, Clara helped him back into his chair. His cheeks were flushed with exertion and the ocean air. As she adjusted the straps, his fingers brushed hers, lingering with intent. "You make it feel like I have a future," he murmured. "You do. You just needed someone to remind you." Their foreheads touched. It would have been a kiss if either of them dared, but they didn't. Not yet. The moment held them like breath in a quiet room, but the calm shattered 2 days later. Clara had just finished organizing the kitchen pantry when she found herself face to face with Nathan Aldridge, Ethan's longtime attorney and the acting trustee of his estate. He was tall-polished and had the sharp eyes of someone who mistrusted everything outside his control. "Miss Bennet," he said crisply, "I believe we need to talk." She followed him to the private office near the front wing, a room she rarely entered. Nathan closed the door behind them, then turned to her with folded arms. "I understand you've been spending a significant amount of personal time with Mr. Grayson." Clara's posture stiffened. "I work closely with him, yes. He's requested my help with daily care." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "Daily care was never in your job description. You were hired as a domestic staff member, not a personal aide, not a confidant, and certainly not whatever it is you're becoming now." Clara's face flushed. "I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't manipulate my way into his trust. He chose to open up." Nathan walked to the window, looking out at the sea. "Mr. Grayson is vulnerable. He doesn't always make rational decisions. And I have a duty to protect his assets, his estate, and frankly, his legacy." She stared at him. "You think I'm using him? I think it's convenient," he replied coolly. A young woman with a history in care work finds herself living under the same roof as a lonely billionaire. Forgive me if the optics are concerning. Clara stepped forward, her voice low and controlled. "I cared for a dying mother for 6 years. I sat beside patients who had no one to hold their hand as they left this world. I don't do what I do for money. I do it because people like Ethan deserve to be seen as more than their suffering." Nathan didn't blink. "Be that as it may, I've advised Mr. Grayson to reconsider your position here." Clara felt the air leave her lungs. He'll make the final decision, of course. But I'd prepare yourself. You've crossed boundaries that don't go unnoticed." That night, Clara didn't go to the West Wing. She sat in her room, hands clenched, waiting for a summons that never came. Her phone buzzed once, Ethan's name lighting up, but she didn't answer. She couldn't. The following morning, Holloway handed her a sealed envelope and averted her eyes. "Ethan wants to speak with you," she said quietly. "He's in the music room." Clara entered cautiously, heart-pounding. Ethan was at the piano, fingers resting silently on the keys. He didn't turn. "Nathan spoke to you, didn't he?" She nodded. Ethan sighed. "I told him to stay out of it, but he thinks he's protecting me." "Are you asking me to leave?" Clara's voice cracked. Ethan turned pain in his eyes. "I'm asking you to give me space to think. Everything is moving so fast, and I don't want to hurt you. You're not. But if you push me away now, you will." Ethan looked down at his hands. "I'm scared, Clara. I haven't let anyone this close since Julia. And now suddenly I can't stop thinking about you, about us, about what it would mean if I let myself love you." She stepped closer. "Let yourself, please." He shook his head. "I need time. I need to know that what I feel isn't just gratitude dressed up as love." Clara nodded, tears burning her eyes. "Then I'll go, but only because you asked me to. Not because I want to. Not because I believe for a second that what we've shared isn't real." She placed the envelope gently on the piano bench beside him. Her resignation. Then she turned and walked out of the room, leaving Ethan staring at the space where she'd stood and the silence between them heavier than any injury he'd ever endured. For 3 days, the house felt colder than ever. Ethan barely moved from his room. He didn't play. He didn't write. He barely spoke to anyone. Nathan tried to talk strategy. Holloway brought him his meals in silence. But nothing filled the ache Clara had left behind. It was Holloway who finally broke the stillness. She entered his room one morning and set down a cup of tea without a word. Then she looked at him. "I've worked for this family for 23 years. I buried your parents cleaned up, after heartbreak held your wife's hand when she was scared to fly. But I've never seen you look at anyone the way you looked at Clara." Ethan didn't respond. Holloway continued. "If you let her walk away without telling her how you feel, you'll regret it longer than you've regretted anything else. Even the accident. Even Julia." Ethan's voice was barely a whisper. "I don't know if I can give her what she needs." "Then ask her. Don't assume. Don't punish her for caring more than anyone else dared to." That night, for the first time in years, Ethan wheeled himself to the front door, opened it, and left the house. Alone. He had no plan, only a name, a place, and a heart that refused to let go. Clara didn't expect to see him again, at least not outside the house. After she left the Grayson estate, she returned to the care center where she had once worked part-time before taking the cleaning job. It was small, underfunded, and exhausting, but there was comfort in the routine, in the quiet, hands-on work of caring for those who could no longer care for themselves. Her coworkers welcomed her back without asking questions. They could sense something had shifted in her. She moved slower, smiled less, and carried a stillness in her that hadn't been there before. Some evenings after her shift, Clara would walk down to the beach, nearby, and watch the waves crash, closing her eyes and imagining Ethan beside her. Sometimes she spoke aloud to him, saying the things she wished she'd said before walking away. Other nights she sat in silence, letting the pain of absence settle around her like sea fog. On the 4th day, Clara was assisting with a group therapy session when the door at the back of the room opened. She looked up, and her breath caught Ethan. He was in his wheelchair wearing a dark coat, his hair slightly windblown, and his eyes locked on hers like she was the only person in the room. The therapist paused mid-sentence. A few patients turned. Clara stood up slowly, not trusting what she was seeing. Ethan moved forward, his chair whirring quietly on the tiled floor until he reached her. He looked different, not just physically, but emotionally. Open, brave, soft in a way she hadn't seen before. "I didn't know what to say until I got here," he said. "So I thought I'd just come and find the words on the way." She blinked, unsure if this was real. "You came all the way here?" "Why? Because I'm tired of choosing silence. I'm tired of being afraid of what it means to feel something again." He handed her a folded piece of paper. Clara opened it. It was a song, a simple melody with handwritten lyrics beneath the staff lines. The title read, "For the Woman Who Stayed Until I Told Her to Go." She looked up, tears brimming in her eyes. "You wrote this for me. I wrote it because of you. And I want to play it, in front of people, with you in the room, if you'll come." Her voice shook. "Ethan, you don't have to prove anything. I know how you feel." He shook his head. "I want to show you, the world, myself. Because for the first time in years, I want to be seen." The concert took place 2 weeks later in a small private auditorium in Los Angeles. It wasn't grand or formal, just a quiet evening of music for invited guests, many of whom had supported Ethan's earlier philanthropic work. The program listed only one original piece. As the lights dimmed, Ethan rolled himself to the piano and adjusted the seat carefully. He turned toward the crowd and spoke into the microphone. "I once thought the worst thing that could happen to me was losing the woman I loved. Then I thought the worst was surviving without her. But the truth is, the hardest thing was learning how to let someone in again." He turned his head toward Clara, who sat in the front row, her hands clutched tightly in her lap. "And then I met someone who didn't try to fix me. She just stayed. And because she stayed, I found the courage to try again." The room fell into complete silence as Ethan began to play. The melody was delicate, hesitant at first, like a question. Then it swelled into something deeper, a sound that wrapped itself around every soul in the room. Clara felt the notes like touches on her skin, each one whispering a truth she had tried to bury. That she loved him, that he loved her, that somehow against the odds, their broken pieces had started to fit together. When the song ended, no one clapped at first. There was only quiet, sacred and suspended. Then slowly the applause began. Clara stood, hands trembling. Ethan turned back to her expression unreadable. But then he moved forward down the small ramp from the stage, stopping in front of her. He reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out a velvet box. Not at the beach, not in the bathtub, not in some overly symbolic place. Just here, in front of people who mattered, people who had watched him fall and now saw him rise. "Clara, I don't want to wait anymore. I don't care how long it takes me to walk beside you. I don't care if we never have a normal life. I only care that it's with you. Will you marry me?" She didn't cry right away. She laughed, breathless and overwhelmed, then nodded as she stepped into his arms. Yes, 1,000 times yes. The audience erupted into applause, but Clara only heard the beating of her heart and the quiet whisper of Ethan's voice against her ear. "You gave me my life back." "No," she whispered back. "We gave each other a second one." 6 months later, the Grayson estate no longer felt like a museum of silence. The curtains were open now, letting in sunlight that painted the white walls gold every morning. The garden had been expanded, a winding path cutting through new rows of lavender and rosemary. Laughter echoed through the halls, soft, frequent, unmistakably alive. Clara stood in the kitchen, barefoot, wearing one of Ethan's old shirts, stirring tea, while soft music played from a speaker on the counter. Outside, Ethan was on the terrace with a group of young patients from the rehab center they had opened together, sharing stories about persistence, loss, and the stubborn nature of hope. He had made it his mission to create a space where healing didn't come from pressure or performance, but from presence. They called it the second house, not a hospital, not a clinic, but a home. A place where being seen was just as important as being treated. Clara smiled watching him talk. His gestures animated his eyes bright. He still used his chair most days, though, with the help of new supports. And months of careful work, he could now stand for short periods. But no one there cared about that. No one looked at him and saw what he lacked. They saw a man who had rebuilt his life from ashes. That evening, as the sky turned purple above the ocean, Clara walked out to the terrace and took Ethan's hand. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the sun dip below the horizon, waves brushing the cliffs like a whispered memory. Ethan turned to her, smiling gently. "Do you remember what you said the first time you helped me out of the bath?" She laughed. "I said you weren't meant to be left on cold floors." He nodded. "And you haven't left me since, not once." Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. "You didn't ask me to stay. You let me choose, and I chose you, always." The wedding wasn't extravagant, just a gathering in the garden beneath the same archway where Ethan had first tried to walk again with Clara by his side. Friends, staff, and a few of the patients surrounded them in a quiet circle. Ethan didn't kneel. He didn't have to. He held both of Clara's hands in his and looked her in the eyes. "You didn't fall in love with the man I used to be. You saw who I was underneath all the brokenness. And you stayed." Clara's voice trembled. "You didn't fall in love with the version of me that looked strong. You saw the girl who didn't know where she belonged anymore, and you gave her a home." They exchanged rings, simple engraved with the words, "Still here." The same phrase Ethan had written in his notebook again and again. Not just surviving, not just existing, still here, together. That night, under a sky full of stars, Clara and Ethan danced. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't graceful. It was slow, with his arms around her, and her cheek against his chest, swaying gently in the moonlight. But it was theirs, real, flawed, beautiful. A love born not from rescue, but from recognition. From choosing each other over and over in all their imperfect glory. Because real love doesn't save you, it stays, even when it's hard. Especially then,